Good morning. Hi, everybody. This is Chef Jeannie. With me, as always, is Chef Rose. This is BK201, Wednesday live session, 9 a.m. Central Time. Thanks for coming. Today, we're going to start talking about international desserts, which is kind of a multi-week project. We will be making several things from international desserts, and we're going to stem that into plated dessert techniques. So this will be a good place to start. We didn't have any resources to show on our class page this week, and I don't believe that there's a quiz, a knowledge check regarding the subject matter, so I think you lucked out on that. Chef Rose is going to begin by talking about your assignment from last week, which was vegan baking. I received a lot of questions about that over the past several days, which was super interesting because I got to hear about different types of ingredients people are trying and challenges they faced if they couldn't find one thing and substituting it for another. But all in all, I think that it was a really interesting assignment, especially if you kind of thought outside the box a little bit. But Chef Rose is going to show you some really cool examples of assignments she saw that she liked. Take it away, Chef Rose.
All right, so everyone pretty much did a really great job this week. I haven't seen anything too crazy as far as mistakes or challenges or anything like that went. I did see a couple people were having a little bit of a struggle with the peanut butter blondie in the fact that it was getting underbaked, so I saw that more often than not. And so the one thing you want to look for with a blondie is pretty much similar as what you would look for with a brownie, is you want to make sure that it looks pretty dry on the edges and has a little bit of like a golden brown kind of hue to it. And so that's what you're looking for with that. But I think that was really the main thing that I saw that was a little bit of a challenge, was I saw a lot that were underbaked. But I did see a lot of you getting pretty creative with your vegan desserts. I saw a few that really stood out to me because you guys kind of went above and beyond and out of the box and tried and like find something else vegan to make other than the peanut butter blondies, which I thought was really cool. So these are a couple that I saw that stood out to me. So I'm going to share my screen here. And so first one we have here is Kaylee, and she made a vegan peanut butter cookie, which I really like to see. And peanut butter is one of those things that are pretty easy to use in vegan baking because it kind of helps things stick together and also gives you a little bit of moisture in your baking as well. So that's one thing you'll see pretty commonly in vegan baking, but she did a really great job with these. They're baked all the way through. You can see they've got that kind of nice soft kind of crumbly texture to them like a cookie should have, so that looks great. So that was Kaylee. And so next we've got Nancy here, who made a chocolate mousse, and then she kind of did and doctored these up a little bit with like a cherry on top and a little bit of what looked like some vegan whipped cream. I think she said it was a coconut whipped cream, if I'm not mistaken. She sprinkled some stuff on top and put it in these cute little cups, and so definitely kind of decorated it a little bit, which was really nice to see. So everything looks really great here. You can see how nice and smooth and creamy it looks and how a mousse should look, so that looks terrific. And then, so that was Nancy, and up we've got Sierra here, who made a tofu cheesecake, which at first sounded kind of odd to me, but then I looked at the formula that she used, and there's a lot of other ingredients in there that kind of helped tone down that tofu texture and flavor to it, which was awesome to see, because you don't really want to use tofu as the main ingredient in a vegan dessert, because then that's all you're going to taste. And so you kind of want to combine it with other things that are going to kind of mask that flavor a little bit. So this was her cheesecake. She's got the graham cracker in the bottom. I like that she kind of put it in a glass and made it a little bit more, I don't want to use the word fancy, but kind of like a little bit more elegant, and kind of upscaled the presentation a little bit. And there's a little bit of some garnish on top as well. So I thought that Sierra did a really great job there. And then last but not least, we've got Lindsay here who made vegan cupcakes, which I always love seeing vegan cake and vegan buttercreams and things like that because it's kind of harder to do. And she did a really great job with this. You can see how fluffy her cake is and how beautiful that frosting looks. It looks like exactly like a buttercream, but obviously there's no butter in it. And so I love that she did this. And so it looks really nice and fluffy and moist and delicious. And so she did a wonderful job with that as well. So those are just a couple that I saw that really stood out, that kind of went above and beyond and tried something that was different in vegan baking and kind of tried to make something that they already know that they like, which I really like to see, that when you're trying to make something that you're already passionate about and kind of play with the formula a little bit, it helps to kind of learn a little bit better about that type of product. So it's what I'm hoping to see in these next couple of weeks when we're doing international baking. So that way I can see you guys find something that you're passionate about, even going and finding international desserts for maybe your own own family desserts and things like that. Because I'm German and Scottish, and there are a billion German and Scottish recipes that my dad has that he's passed down to me, which is just, it makes it more interesting to learn about when it's something that you're already passionate about. So hope to see really great stuff this next week and the next few weeks when we're learning about that, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.
Thanks, Chef Rose. So I want to hear from the students. Tell me about your experience with vegan baking. I already saw a whole bunch of questions and we had discussions over the weekend and everything, but I want to hear what you thought about it, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, what you plan to try in the future. Nancy.
Yes, for the mousse that I made, I was really surprised. I didn't use the regular chocolate. I used cocoa powder, and I was really surprised. It was very rich, and I had a little trouble with the coconut cream to make it like a whipped cream. Um, but I put it in the refrigerator and it hardened up not really hardened, but it got thicker consistency so that I could put on top of the mousse. So it was really good. I also made a lemon chia meringue pie, and I ran out of the coconut milk, so I used some almond milk, and I think that made a difference. It didn't make it as firm. Uh, and you didn't bake the chia. I mean, you had to cook it over the stove, but you didn't have to place it in the oven. But the crust was made from dates, coconut, and almond flour, a little almond flour, and that was really good. It held really well, and I did have to toast that a little in the oven prior to putting the cool chia in it. And I was really surprised with the chickpea meringue that I made, with the liquid, the aquafaba, and it really tasted well, although it does melt kind of like meringue does. After a while, it gets a little watery. It did do that, but the fun part was that you could taste it all the time because it wasn't raw eggs, so that was great.
Did you think that the aquafaba had a flavor to it at all? Like, did it taste weird or salty? I always thought it tasted a little bit salty.
Initially, it had a different taste to it. Yeah, a little on the salty, but as you added, it asked for stevia. So as I added the stevia, it was better. And I was really surprised how well it fluffs up, and it took quite a while. You had to start off at a low speed and then get a little higher and higher and higher on the speed. But it was fabulous and it tasted great. So I will be using that again.
Good. Good. You mentioned something about making the whipped cream with the coconut milk. Do you remember what brand you used for that by any chance?
No, I can't remember what it was.
I was going to say I had a bunch of questions about vegan whipped cream, and I kind of wanted to mention that coconut cream is widely used to make vegan whipped cream. You just have to make sure that you take the actual like solid part out of the can. I'm going to show you some pictures of like different cans that it comes in, but you have to take the solid part out and like remove the liquid from it. You can't just dump the whole can in there, because I had some people asking me like, I'm dumping this in the bowl and whipping it up, but it's not getting thick, and it's because you dump the entire contents.
Yeah, I didn't do that because it wasn't coconut milk, it was coconut cream, so I thought it was all cream. So
Right.
maybe that next time I'll do that.
Yeah. Can you guys see my screen here? Coconut cream, you have to make sure that you're actually buying the can that says coconut cream and not coconut milk. But when you open it up, it's going to have like a solid part that floats to the top. That is the part that you want to use. So you would kind of spoon it out into like a strainer, and then strain off the liquid that comes with it. The liquid, you can use it for other things. Like in this particular recipe this week, you could even use it in your syrup. But to make vegan whipped cream, you just want to use the solid part of that, and then you can put some sugar in there. But always keep in mind with sugar is that sugar is actually kind of a liquid, even though it comes in solid form. Some people don't realize that when they keep adding sugar and sugar and sugar to try to stiffen things up, it works the opposite way, because when it mixes with the liquid in whatever your product is, it becomes a liquid itself. So adding more sugar is not going to stabilize it, especially not this particular thing we're talking about, the coconut whipped cream. But it's pretty good. I like it a lot. It's obviously it has a different flavor than whipped cream, but it's probably the most often used to make vegan whipped cream. Did anybody else try that for any reason? Coconut whipped cream? Maybe the people who asked me the questions are not in the session today. So who else wants to talk about their experience?
I had a lot of fun making the blondies. I was kind of skeptical. I didn't think it would hold together. I thought it would just I'd cut them and then pull them out the pan and they just fall apart. But they held together really well. They were a bit oily, so I don't know how would I go about adjusting the amount of oil or anything so that they're not so shiny on top.
Let's take a look at the recipe real quick. Sometimes, depending on what brand of peanut butter you use, and the actual types of products that you have, because nut butters do have lots and lots of oil in them. So let's see what it says here.
Yeah, I used the Kroger brand of peanut butter because it was that natural peanut butter.
Yeah, there's peanut butter, you've got oil in there, so you could try backing down on your oil just a little bit, because I know this recipe is really moist just on its own, so you could probably get away with taking out some of the oil. If you use a different type of peanut butter that's a little bit more on the dry side, like some brands, like organic brands of peanut butter, they tend to be a little bit drier, if that makes sense. I don't know if you've ever seen fresh peanut butter or organic peanut butter. They tend to not be as spreadable as, I don't know, I think sometimes they add extra fat into the stuff that you buy at the grocery store. But you could do that. You could try a different type of peanut butter. You could back off on your oil a little bit. Also, if you're using almond milk, I know there's, you have light almond milk and regular almond milk. They have different levels of fat, even though it doesn't have a lot of fat in there. Just think about the fatty ingredients that are in your recipe, and whether or not you can back off a little bit, which I think you can, especially on the oil in that recipe.
I was also surprised that I actually didn't use almond milk. I actually used the coconut milk you get in the cooler section of the grocery store, because I buy it all the time. And it really didn't affect the flavor or the texture or anything like that either.
Yeah, the almond milk is pretty much there to act as a liquid, to bind the ingredients together. I don't think that it needs to be almond. at all. Also, I had some questions about the almond flour. I can't find almond flour, or, you know, it's too expensive. You can use other types of flour too, different types of nut flours. You know, you could always make your own almond flour. You could grind up hazelnuts. There's lots of different types of nuts that you can grind to make nut flour. But when you are making your own nut flour, you want to add a little bit of starch to it when you're grinding it up, so that it doesn't stick together and that it doesn't start making like almost like an almond butter. You basically put the nuts in a food processor, or you can grind them up by hand if you had one of those little like mortar and pestles. But you would add a little bit of starch, like some corn starch or potato starch, something to it to kind of keep it from sticking together. And then you pass it through like a strainer to get out the large bits and just save the small bits. But yeah, you can use different types of almond or different types of nut milks, different types of nut flours as well, just depending on what you like.
Was the nut flour really necessary? Could we have used a different type of flour?
The nut flour is kind of there as a little bit of like almost like a dryer and a binder. But since it's a vegan recipe, you could use just a little bit of regular flour, but you probably wouldn't use as much because regular flour is like super starchy and the nut flour is not. But
Okay.
a lot of times you find nut flours in vegan products because of the nutritional value. There is protein in nuts, so vegans try to get protein wherever they possibly can, and that's one of the ways that you can add nutrition to different types of products is by adding nuts to it. Unless, of course, somebody's allergic. But yeah, you don't, I mean, if it's just a vegan product and not gluten-free, you can try adding just a regular type of flour, but don't add quite as much because you don't want to dry out the recipe too much. But then again, adding a regular wheat flour would maybe help absorb some of that oil too, if you found that it was a little bit too greasy.
Okay.
Yeah. Who else? Anybody else want to talk? Somebody told me that they plan to continue using vegan products in this particular assignment that we're working on this week. Has anybody just fallen in love with vegan baking and they want to continue doing it? Nancy's going to use them again. Are you going to use them again this week or just in the future?
Probably in the future. I'm looking forward to this one assignment we have for this week.
Okay, good.
Felicia, I saw you shaking your head no. Was there something you didn't like about the vegan baking?
I just really like the way eggs and butter flavor everything. It's really rich and flavorful, and with vegan products, it has flavor, but it's not the same. It doesn't give you that wow factor. It's fine in like regular cooking, but as far as like desserts, it's just not quite the same.
I get that. And just like I was saying last week or the week before, that's just something that you have to understand about baking for specialty diets, that, you know, you're going to achieve a certain type of product, but it's not always going to be the same as what it would be like if you're using regular ingredients. So just make sure that you're, you know, realistically thinking about that in your head, that it's not going to come out quite the same as it would if you used eggs and butter and milk. And that's something you definitely want to communicate with your customers as well. I can't tell you how many times I've had customers who want, you know, either gluten-free or vegan or something of that nature, especially if it's like both of them together, you know, gluten-free and vegan and dairy-free or whatever, and then they complain that it wasn't the same as, you know, the first time I got it here, it was like really, really fluffy and delicious and rich and everything, and now it's just kind of like blah, it's good, but it's not as good. I'm like, well, the first time I made it for you, it wasn't vegan and it wasn't gluten-free and it wasn't dairy-free. So that's just, you know, and people's tastes change too, especially if they've been on diets for a long time. You know, what tastes kind of blah to you now as a vegan, you know, your first week of being vegan, it might become super delicious to you in a few months or, you know, however long, you know, your tastes change. It's kind of an acquired taste and texture. Anyone else? Well, good news about our project this week is that it's not vegan unless you want it to be, although it is a very glutinous, bready type of product. So you're going to need to use wheat flour for it, and there are, you know, animal products in the recipe. There are wheat products in the recipe. So I would suggest that if you are going to experiment with a specialty diet for this particular recipe, maybe try it the way it's written first and then try it the other way, just so you can kind of see how it should be. And then as you're experimenting with your specialty diets, you can kind of tweak it here and there to see what it's supposed to be like. I'm going to show you a picture of what we're talking about. It's called a baba al rum. And here is usually what it looks like. They're usually round in shape, but you can make them pretty much any shape you want as long as you have a pan for it. It's kind of like a crispy donut. It's a yeast, like a yeast product. It's like a bread dough and a cake batter combined. It's glutinous, but it's kind of loose, and it's a little bit different, but it's kind of like a crispy donut, and then it absorbs a whole bunch of syrup that you're going to end up pouring on it, which is usually alcohol based, but you don't have to use alcohol if you don't want to. But there's so many different ways that you can present it in different types of garnishes too. But that is what we'll be making this week. And I'm going to show you the class page. I did mention in the class page that if you don't want to use alcohol, you don't have to. And you also don't have to make this recipe. You can make a different baba recipe if you find something that you like, or you could make a different international dessert, but I'll talk about that in just a second. So I'm going to screen share the class page. Okay. All right. Week 5. So your assignment this week, of course, is international baking. I'm going to read you what I wrote here. For this assignment, I suggest that you make the baba with some type of soaking syrup. You can use any flavor profile, which is really cool with this dessert because you can flavor it anyway. It doesn't have to be rum. You could pretty much put any type of flavor you want in there, even if it's herbs or spices, chocolate, whatever you want it to be. You can use your own formula if you find a different one that you like. You don't have to use rum. You can use any type of alcohol, and the syrup doesn't even have to have alcohol in it at all. It's a simple syrup, and simple syrup is basically 50% sugar and 50% water, and you bring it to a boil for about 2 minutes, and that's it. That's your simple syrup. So you don't have to put alcohol in there. But you want to make a nice plate presentation as usual. Don't just put it on a plate with the sauce, but, you know, put a little fruit on it or something, you know, fluffy, like some whipped cream or whatever you want to do. Kind of get interesting with it. If you're not going to make this dessert, you need to stick with a baked dessert, not a no-bake like a mousse or anything. You need it to be baked, and it has to have yeast in the formula. So you're going to be doing something like a baba, maybe a donut or some sort of like a Christmas bread or something. And the dessert must come from another country. You don't want to do anything that originates in the United States. So because we're talking about international baking. Questions on that? What you can do, what you can't do? I know most everybody is probably going to stick with the baba assignment, but like I said, if you're not, you can do something else, but it has to be baked. It has to have yeast in the formula, and it needs to be an international dessert. And whatever it is, if it's not the baba, we want you to kind of explain to us in your narrative what it is and where it comes from, like the country of origin. Make sure that you include the entire mixing process in your photos. Okay, don't forget about your self-ID and your sanitizer. We want to see the entire mixing process and then the product assembled for presentation as well. Okay. Does anybody have any ideas about what they want to make if it's not the baba?
I do.
Okay.
I'm gonna make a Belizean bun.
Say that one more time.
Belizean buns.
Belizean buns from
That's
Belize.
what they're called. Yeah.
Okay, what is that?
It's like a, how do you explain it? It's like a yeast roll, I guess, but it's sweet. So
Okay.
I've already put it in my head once you said we can do it from anywhere as long as it's not the U.S.
Okay. So is it like a bread roll, like a sweet bread roll that you'd eat with dinner?
Yeah. Well, my boyfriend says they eat it with tea. So I'm guessing that's dinner because they call dinner tea.
How do you think that you could make a dessert out of it? I have a suggestion, but I want to hear what you think first.
I don't know. I'm thinking about it right now. I'm pretty sure I could put like fruit in. I don't know, chef. I'm thinking really hard now.
I was going to suggest that you make pain perdu, which is a fancy word for French toast, out of it. You can kind of slice it up and soak it in like a French toast custard, which would be some eggs and milk and a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla, whatever you want to put in there, and fry it up like you're making French toast. And then the coolest thing that I like to do with the pain perdu is sprinkle some sugar on it after it's done and hit it with the torch to kind of brulee it a little bit, like creme brulee, so it's got like a crispy, crackly topping of sugar. And then once it becomes rigid, after you've fried it and bruleed it, you can kind of stack it in interesting ways on the plate. You can cut it in different shapes and arrange it on the plate, and then you can serve it with sauce and all kinds of garnishes and make it really cool. Instead of just like a bread roll, you can do some really fun things with it.
I might do that.
Yeah, you could even incorporate the rum sauce into it. After it's cooked, you could, put the rum sauce on the plate or sprinkle a little bit over the product as well. That would be pretty tasty.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the recipe, the formula, and then we'll watch the video. After that, we can talk about some more international desserts. I've got a presentation that was made by Chef Susie that Chef Paul shared with me, so I'm going to show that to you as well. Okay.
Excuse me, chef.
Yes.
Just question.
Mm-hmm.
If I doesn't like the room flavor, can I use any like orange, coconut, or something else?
Yes, any type of soaking syrup, and it does not have to have alcohol in it. I was saying before we started recording that I prefer to make this dessert without the alcohol, just because I don't like tasting alcohol in my desserts, right, unless it's a chocolate rum cake. For some reason, I really like that. But yeah, you can make any flavor syrup. You just make that basic simple syrup, which is 50% sugar and 50% water. Cook it, boil it for a couple minutes, and you can add whatever you want to it. Keep in mind that you can add things to it while it's cooking, like you can steep citrus peels in there if you wanted to make orange or lemon. You could even put like grapefruit in there. There's so many different things you can steep in simple syrup to get more of the flavor out of it. I've seen people put raisins and dried fruits. You can put a variety of spices. And if you would rather not use like a simple syrup, you can kind of make some other type of sauce to soak it in. It just needs to be kind of on the more liquidy side. Instead of like super thick, you wouldn't want to try to like soak it in a creme anglaise custard sauce or anything, because it's not really going to pick it up. It needs to be a little bit thinner and a little bit more liquidy. So if you make like a really loose, like strawberry or something, strawberry sauce or anything, really use your imagination. Really use your imagination. This is a really cool product because there's so many different things that you can do with it and different ways to present it. I'm going to show you some photos which I thought were super interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. First, I'm going to show you the photos because I just said that, and now I want to look at them because they're cool. Okay. Okay, this was my favorite, this one right here. It's in a cup. The liquid is down there in the bottom of the cup, so it just continues to absorb the liquid. It's pineapple flavored. I was looking at the description, so they've got some pineapple down there. I'm sure the syrup is pineapple syrup. And then they've got like a little cookie on the rim of the glass with some whipped cream and some more pineapple. Looks like maybe roasted pineapple and some of the green part. Isn't that cool? It's not even on a plate, it's in a cup. You know, something interesting I heard one time was that you can't charge as much for desserts when they're not on plates. I don't know how true that is, but a chef in Chicago was telling me that once you put your dessert in a cup, it becomes less valuable. Maybe you could just put the cup on the plate afterwards and serve it with a cup on a plate, but I don't know how true that is, but I don't know. Anyway, okay, so that was pineapple in a glass. This is on a plate, of course. Some whipped cream on top and some little, looks like mint or something. You could use any type of microgreen. I'm not a huge fan of putting mint on desserts unless there is like a mint flavor profile in the dessert, but like if you go to a fancy store like Whole Foods or any sort of fresh market, they should have little boxes of microgreens that you can use, which is basically like miniature salad that you can sprinkle on your dessert to give it some color. And then I'm not sure what this long piece is here. It could be like a candied vanilla bean slice or maybe a piece of tempered chocolate, but that just gives it a little bit of extra shape to it as well. Here they gave the plate some height by using this tweel. And then you can see that there are some microgreens on the plate instead of mint. And then the syrup is down there. It looks like they have like shaved melon or something. Instead of like cutting the melon into chunks or scooping it into a ball shape, you can shave it like paper thin and make all different kinds of shapes with it. And then it looks like there's some kind of foam. Foaming is popular. I don't know if you've ever seen desserts that have foam on it, but you have to mix like a sauce with some sort of protein like egg whites or powdered albumin or something, and you whip it up with a stick blender until it gets air, and then you can, it's kind of like the foam on top of a cappuccino, and then you can scoop it off and dump it on the plate or on top of the dessert, and that gives like a saucy quality. It's flavorful, but it's a whole different texture instead of just being like liquid. That's pretty cool. I don't know if it's trendy anymore. It was trendy about maybe 10, 15 years ago when molecular gastronomy started getting really popular. Okay. Here you have these are miniature babas, looks like. They're in these tiny little spoons. And they are served with pipettes of the liquor syrup too, so you can squeeze that in there. And they're also served on some type of custard here. It looks like pastry cream or something. They probably use pastry cream because they have eclairs back here and they probably cross-utilized it as well. That's kind of cool. This is a beautiful plated dessert with sliced peaches. I imagine they have like a thicker peach sauce here, some sort of cookie crumble or streusel, and then you have the baba as well. That looks kind of on the dry side, so maybe they just soaked it and placed it on the plate, but I don't see any of the soaking sauce on the plate. Here, the baba is torn up into pieces. Last time I made this dessert, I was working in a restaurant where we did that. We baked it in a loaf pan, and we actually tore it in random size pieces and dipped it in the syrup and then put it on the plate. Again, you have some microgreens too. I love that plate because it's super colorful.
Excuse me, chef, on the plate, the pink color, it looks like a sponge. Why this?
That's probably some kind of sponge cake, maybe raspberry sponge or something. if you look up the recipe in your book for like jelly roll sponge and you add that's probably exactly what it is, because they've got it sprinkled on the plate as well. If you add dehydrated ground up raspberries or strawberries to the sponge cake recipe, you can, and a little bit of like pink food coloring, you can end up with a product that looks like this.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
that's gorgeous.
That is, yeah. What else? Here, I can't really tell what kind of plate it's served on, if it's in a bowl or something, but I just like the way it looks, because it looks like that they scooped out a little bit of the baba itself so they can kind of stick things in there. Like they have a vanilla bean here and an anise seed, a little scoop of whipped cream, and then across the top of it they have various strips of citrus zest. Looks like lime, orange, and lemon, and then a cinnamon stick. So I would assume that the soaking syrup is flavored with those types of ingredients as well. Anise, vanilla, and citrus, a little bit of cinnamon. So you can see that there are many ways that you can serve this dessert as opposed to just on a plate sitting in its own syrup, which is really cool. Okay, any questions before I go to the formula in the video? No? Okay. All right, where are we? All right, so down here under the assignment section, I do have the formula, and I also have another link which will show you some other types of desserts that are made with yeast. And if you want to look at this and just kind of scroll through here, you can see that here you have some Portuguese donuts. So that's a yeast product and it's from Portugal, so that would work really well too. There's another one here. Where is it? German plum cake, German dessert. So there's a few different ones here. Here's a brioche, which would be French. These are Arabian date cookies. I was curious about those. Those probably taste really good. They've got dates inside, which is a huge popular ingredient in Middle Eastern baking. I think I'd like to try making those. These are babka muffins, which is Jewish. So anyway, check out that link if you don't want to make the baba and you want to try something else. Otherwise, this is our formula. So you've got pretty standard ingredients here: bread flour, whole milk. You need to get instant yeast. Now make sure that you are using the right type of yeast. Instant yeast is not the same as dry active yeast. It is not the same as fresh yeast. Instant yeast is just going to work a lot faster than the dry active. So when you are shopping for your yeast, you have to, make sure that it says instant, or it might say rapid rise as well. Now, after we talk about this formula, I can show you the page in the book where it talks about yeast conversions. In case you do want to use a different type of yeast, you just have to plug in like a little mathematical formula with the numbers to figure out what the scaling would be on a different type of yeast. Anyway, granulated sugar, eggs, more bread flour. Can you think of why there's 2 scalings of bread flour in this recipe?
Maybe one is for first ferment.
Yeah, one is for the sponge and then one is for the actual formula.
Right. Yeah, so remember back to your bread baking class for this. This is just a regular yeast dough. It's going to be a little bit thinner. It's going to be more like a brioche meets a cake batter. But anyway, yeah, the first amount of bread flour is for the sponge. So that is your first step, is to mix the first 3 or 4 ingredients. What is it? Bread flour, milk, and yeast. Yeah, your first 3 ingredients to make a sponge. So you're just going to put those in a bowl and stir them together and let them sit for an hour or so until it puffs up. It's going to double in volume. And then you will mix in your sugar, eggs, the second flour, and the salt. You can do that by hand, or you can do it in the mixer if you want to. But then you are going to need to put it into the mixing bowl with the paddle attachment, and you're going to mix that until it's smooth. Make sure that you scrape down the bowl a couple times during that process. And then you're going to add the butter. Now the butter does need to be at room temperature for this. Not too soft, but definitely not cold, because then you're just going to end up with chunks of butter in your formula, and that's not what we want. We want the butter to completely like emulsify into this dough. So room temperature butter. And you can add those a little bit at a time, like just throw the chunks in there kind of slowly while it's mixing. And then just mix it up until it's fully incorporated. And like I said before, it is going to be glutinous. It's going to be sticky like a bread dough, but it's going to be really, really loose, almost like I said, like a cake batter type of bread dough. And then from there, you're going to pipe it into whatever molds you find. And I'm going to show you two different videos. I'm going to show you Chef Tom's video and another one that I found on YouTube where you can see some different ways, different pans you can pipe it into. And then from there, you want to let it rise. It's got a proof. So in step 5, after you pipe it, just like a bread dough, which it is, you have to let it proof. Don't forget that step's very important. So set it on the counter at room temperature and let it double in size. I don't know how long it's going to take depending on the temperature of the room you're in. And then bake it. It shouldn't be too dark. It should kind of be golden brown, but it's going to have kind of a dry and crispy shell to it. You can tap on it. It might sound hollow. Okay. And then from there, you'll let it cool down, and then you can soak it in the rum syrup. So we'll watch the video. Any questions about that?
So is it supposed to be the texture of like when you make pâte à choux?
It is like pâte à choux. It's going to be a little bit more sticky. Like when you scoop it, it's going to kind of like, it's going to be more gummy and gelatinous than pâte à choux, but it's going to have the very similar texture. And it's going to be the similar color too. So yeah. All right. And the video right here. Do you hear the sound? Okay.
Baba rum is a cake saturated in syrup made from hard liquor, typically rum. The modern version used today dates back to the 17th century in France, though the base technique can be traced back to Poland and Ukraine even earlier than that. The cake is often served in individual portions, but can also be made into a larger cake, much like a bundt. For this particular cake, both the syrup and the cake are equally important. The cake must be strong enough to withhold the added liquid, and the syrup's flavor takes center stage. The end result should walk the fine line between moist, but not soggy. To begin, first make the sponge. Mix the bread flour, milk, and yeast until combined to form a smooth batter.
So here's one reason why, if you're following this formula, you should use instant yeast. Instant yeast does not need to be hydrated before you mix it with the other ingredients. If you were using a regular dry active yeast or fresh yeast, it would need to be soaked in the liquid first. So if you have your first portion of liquid, you would have to hydrate the yeast in the liquid before you add the flour, and that will take a few minutes. So keep that in mind. If you choose to use dry active yeast instead, you can't just mix it with the flour like this. You've got to hydrate it first.
You're not really trying to develop any gluten here, so all we're looking for is hydration and, like I said, a smooth batter. When it's mixed, you can cover it with plastic. After mixing, allow it to rest until it's doubled in volume. After the batter is doubled, add the sugar, eggs, bread flour, and salt and mix together with a paddle. Continue to mix until the mixture has developed gluten and is silky smooth. When the dough has developed gluten, it will become stretchy but strong and will not easily break. This dough in particular will maintain these characteristics but be pretty soft. You may want to scrape down the side.
So do not rush this particular mixing process. This is the part where you're going to develop that gluten that you need. The next part is the addition of the butter, but that's not for developing gluten. So do mix in this step until it starts to become kind of like sticky and glutinous.
The butter should be pliable, and at this point you can add the butter, continue to mix for another 5 to 7 minutes until the batter becomes even smoother. Before filling the individual baking pans, preheat the oven to 400 degrees. While the oven preheats, add the batter to a piping bag fitted with a 1/2-inch tube. After filling the bag, pipe about 50 grams in each mold. It's best to weigh the portions, but being within 5 to 10 grams is generally going to be acceptable.
So he says 50 grams, but that's just depending on what type of pan you're baking it in. Obviously, if you're using a larger pan, 50 grams wouldn't be enough. It looks like he's got like a mini cupcake pan here. So whatever you're doing, I would say halfway or a little bit more than halfway up the sides of the pan. Keep in mind that you are going to be, fermenting it or proofing it, and it's going to rise. So don't fill the pan too high. And you can use muffin cups. You can use little mini bundt pans, cannelé molds. Even if you had like a tiny little loaf pan, you could use that. It doesn't have to be any particular mold. It's got to be in something, but it doesn't have to be anything in particular.
When the batter is portioned out, allow them to rest until they double in volume. Once they've doubled, place them in the preheated oven and bake until they become dry, about 15 minutes. When they're done, remove the cakes from the oven and allow to cool. On the stove, prepare a rum simple syrup. While the syrup is still warm, soak each baba with syrup using a pastry brush or immerse it completely in the syrup itself.
You can see that the sides of his little cakes are kind of on the dark side. I think they got a little bit overbaked. Maybe the pan got too hot if he had it sitting on like the floor of the oven because the tops are still kind of pale. Yours should be a little bit more golden brown on the top and not quite as dark on the sides. Now, if you do want to serve it kind of a little bit more rustic, like I showed you where the cakes were torn apart and place on the plate, you would tear them apart first before soaking it. Don't dump them in there whole and soak them and then tear them. You want to tear them while the cake is still dry and then soak the pieces that you've torn apart.
Using a slotted spoon, you can kind of dunk them, push them down in the syrup, and you'll feel them start to fill up with the syrup. It might take a couple minutes before it's completely soaked. Turn them upside down, move them around, and you can really start to feel them fill up with the syrup. Be gentle, you don't want to break them up, but they will fill up with syrup. You're going to put these on a rack to drain, and you can serve them warm if you like, or you can serve them cold. Once they're soaked, you want to use them that day. After draining, assemble the babas with fruit and cream for plating. The texture of the baba au rum cake is made delicious because it manages to be both airy and absorb the syrup without being mushy. The unique texture and flavor makes baba au rum a fantastic dessert option.
So that looks pretty simple, right? Not too complicated. It's just like a loose bread dough. Yeah, I think the most interesting part of this process is going to be plating it in various designs, because the product itself is not that interesting, but what you plan to soak it in and how you plan to present it is going to make it really, really neat, I think. Does anybody have any super cool ideas for what they want to do, or do you want to keep it a secret and surprise us at the end? I would love to hear if somebody has an idea.
Can I feel the dough, or it will be too soft after the syrup?
You can slice it in half. I actually saw a picture of one of them that was sliced in half, and it had like some pastry cream piped into it. You could also like cut a hole in it like you were filling up a cupcake, and you could pipe some filling into it. I would try to soak it first. If you're going to be cutting it, you can either slice it in half or cut the hole out and then put the syrup on it and then put the filling in. That way you don't get syrup all over your filling.
Okay, now it's 400 degree all the baking. It's not too hot. I mean,
I would maybe go a little bit less than that, maybe 360, 370. It also depends on what type of pan you're using. Like if you had a copper bottom pan, like cannelé molds, those get hot really fast. So you would want to go with a lower temperature, but you could bake it for a longer amount of time. 400 is not necessarily the rule. Now, if you are using a convection oven, like if your oven has a quick bake feature on it, you should definitely set it 20 to 30 degrees less, because it's going to bake faster and you don't want it to get too dark.
okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now you could, if you want to experiment with the baking time and temperature, after you pipe them into their molds, you could put them in the refrigerator to kind of like retard the proofing process while you leave one out at room temperature so that it rises faster. And then you can bake that one and test the temperature of your oven and the time it needs to bake while the others are still in the cooler. And then once you figure out what the temperature of the oven should be and how long, then you can take the other ones out to continue proofing at room temperature for a little while longer. And then you'll kind of know. I always like to do that when I'm baking anything, really. If I'm not sure about it the first time, just experiment with one before you put all the product in there and potentially ruin it. Does that make sense? Okay. It's got really dark in here for some reason. That's too late. I want to show you, before we conclude, I want to show you the page in the book which talks about the yeast conversions. You might already be familiar with it from your bread baking class. So on page 79 in your electronic book, it talks right here about how to convert the different types of yeast. So let's say, for example, you want to convert the instant to dry active, because you can't, sorry, somebody's calling me, because you can't find rapid rise or something. You can use this formula. Sorry, Sorry, I'm going to hang up on this person. There. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, you would just take the quantity of the instant yeast in your formula and multiply it by 1.4. So whatever the quantity of instant yeast is in the formula, you just type it in the calculator, multiply it by 1.4, and that'll tell you how much dry active yeast to use in case you want to use that instead. But just remember that the dry active needs to be hydrated in the liquid before you add the flour when you're making your sponge. I did have a slideshow to show you from international desserts, but we're going to be talking about more international desserts next week, so that'll give us plenty to talk about next week. I don't want us to go over. I think we've covered enough material today, but I would like to mention that if you are researching international desserts, just make sure you type in the Google bar with yeast. Like, let's say you're from Saudi Arabia or you want to make a Middle Eastern dessert, just write Middle Eastern dessert with yeast. And remember that it does have to be baked, not a no-bake dessert, not like a custard or anything like that. It's got to be something that you put in the oven, and it has to have yeast in the formula, because that's what we're going to be looking for when we're grading this, is that we're going through like a yeasto process. We don't want to all of a sudden have like a completely different type of product that we're trying to grade. Okay. Anybody else have anything to say? Any questions, concerns? No? Anybody super excited about this one? Who was I talking to about cotton candy flavored baba? Anybody? Is there somebody in here I was speaking with? Somebody asked me the other day if they had to use alcohol, and I was feeling crazy at the moment. I don't know if it was like late at night at bedtime or something, and I was like, you could make a simple syrup and get some cotton candy and put it in the simple syrup to make like cotton candy flavored, and then you could make spun sugar and decorate the plate with spun sugar. Wouldn't that be super cool? Somebody's going to do that now. Who's it going to be? What's spun sugar? Did you guys make spun sugar yet in school? You just need to come to terms with the fact that your kitchen floor is going to get really messy when you make spun sugar. But look it up in your textbook, or look up a video on YouTube about it, because it's really cool. It's just cooking sugar to like the hard crack stage and then shaking it over 2 wooden spoons that are kind of hanging over the edge of your counter. And it collects like a spider web, and then you lift it off and you can put it on your dessert. Felicia is not doing cotton candy. Okay, that's fine. Well, that's about it. So if anybody has any other questions or anything, otherwise I'm going to say goodbye. No? What's so funny? I see you laughing at me. All right. Well, you guys have a lovely day. Thanks for coming, and I can't wait to see what you make. If you have any questions or you're confused about anything, just go ahead and send me a message or call me, text me, whatever you want to do. We can chat. I will have another extra session for this class, I think on tomorrow night. Yeah, tomorrow. I can't do Friday, but tomorrow night, I'm not sure of the time yet, but it's probably going to be somewhere between like 7 to 8:30 p.m., but I will send you a message with that information. And it won't be an hour, probably be more like 30 or 40 minutes. But if you want to come to that, that'd be good. Otherwise, I'll see you next Wednesday. Okay, have a good day, everybody. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good day, everyone.